Liverpool are a bit of a mess, but can Arne Slot fix it? Well, to try and dissect this, on today's show, brought to you by Ball Sports, we've got JJ Bull. We've also got John Mackenzie. I mean, look, where do we begin with this one? Because for a team that did so well in the Premier League last season, when the wheels start falling off, it can't just be one thing, can it?
It's definitely a lot of things. I think we can separate it into two separate boxes. So the first one is things that Arne Slot can control and that we can talk about easily. So like tactics, training, player recruitment, all that sort of stuff. So stuff that Slot has control of and things he can fix. And the other side is things that he cannot control, and that's things out with anyone's control, like how the players feel about certain things, the most obvious of which being the death of Diogo Jota. Horrible tragedy that you have no idea how this affected the players individually. We don't know how relevant it is, but it's something that's very hard to talk about, but it's worth caveating. This is probably a thing that seeps into them. I remember Andy Robertson talking after the Scotland game about how much he was thinking about his friend. And like they're real people. Like I've met Andy Robertson doing a press box interview thing, and he's just a person that would be like a friend in a different life.
I think you're spot on, and I think that there's even that moment where he spoke about both of them potentially talking about going to the World Cup together. Yeah. Those kind of memories are really powerful, especially when you're trying to operate at the optimum level in the Premier League, for instance.
And I think so we don't know obviously how much it's affected all of them, but when they're like in a panic, maybe that comes into their heads. When they're happy, it might come into their heads. You don't know. But there's other things, and I think it's interesting in an article that Ollie Kay wrote in The Athletic, talked to Dan Abrahams, who's a sports psychologist, because there's not just that, there's going to be other things as well that are feeding into this. They're defending a title, and a lot of teams end up worse off in the second season after they won a title. And Dan Abrahams, sports psychologist, says the football team's dressing room is such a complex landscape. The mental side is always interconnecting with other factors, tactical, technical and physical aspects. So again, things that we can talk about and control. It can be staleness or injury problems or new players who aren't fitting in or opponents working out game models to play against you, all of which can have a knock-on effect in terms of losing a couple of games. And I think that is stuff, we're seeing all of that play out just now.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's then dig a little deeper and actually focus on the things that Arne Slot can control. And I guess what's really stark for me is how a team did so well in one season, and that football seemed so explosive, so attractive, so interesting. The same things this season aren't working tactically. Is there a reason for that?
I think so. I think what we need to do is talk about what Liverpool were doing last season that worked so well. So the big question with Arne Slot, I think, when he came in was like, how is he going to try and achieve control? He's trying to balance chaos and control. So what we've seen from Slot in his time in the Premier League, particularly last season, was this idea of controlling the ball in deeper areas. So being able to retain possession around the back line. And the reason why you're going to do this is twofold. On the one hand, because you've got a goalkeeper, if the opposition are all pressing up even man to man, you've still got an extra player. So in theory, it should be easier for you to possess the ball with a numerical advantage. But the other thing is that if the opponents press up, then what you're doing is you're creating space in behind that is then exploitable. So you've got the opportunity to have control in this deeper area, moving the ball around the back line, but if the pressure becomes too hard here, you then have means of being able to inject that chaos into the game. And there's plenty of different ways of being able to do that. So what I like to talk about, mate, is almost like staggering the different solutions that Liverpool have across the pitch. So let's say the ball comes out to the fullback and the fullback is now under pressure. Now there's a few different options for what they can do. In some situations you want the pivot to help out, right? So you could maybe bounce the ball in here and the pivot can find their way into space in that way. But maybe the pivot is being marked, you're under a lot of pressure. There's a couple of options here. You can maybe see the winger dropping in, dragging his player with him. You can either bounce that ball into him and then again try and access this space, or what you've done then is open out space for the striker to run into. So what we have is a lot of these sorts of staggering solutions across the pitch. So control the ball deep. If you're under too much pressure, you can trigger these tempo shifts where suddenly you're attacking at speed. This season we can talk a little bit about why Liverpool are worse on the basis of they've not been able to do this quite so well. I think the best example of this is the fullbacks, weirdly enough. So if you look at this visualization on the screen here, you can see both Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold are green. So they're very valuable passers for this team. Now, if we look at this season, you can see that both those fullbacks have dropped right down. They're much less valuable. And as a result, if you look at the thickness of these lines, you can see that there's much less progressive passing happening that isn't just bouncing the ball around the back line and not finding those opportunities to go forward. So there's one thing. They've brought in some players who in Kerkez and Frimpong and Bradley, who are not progressive passers. They're more, I guess, ball carrier types. That has had an impact on Liverpool's ability to play these sorts of progressive balls. And then we could talk about some of the other options as well in terms of the staggering that we talked about. Luis Diaz has gone. So does Cody Gakpo drop in the same way that he does, et cetera, et cetera. So we could talk about why Liverpool are not quite so good on this basis, but I don't actually think that this is the reason why things have gone so bad for Liverpool. I think this explains why they've been less good, because I think this style of play is really useful when you're in drawing and winning game states, because what this approach relies on is opponents being willing to step up, cause you problems, create that space that you can then attack. The problem is when you get into a losing game state with these games, the opponent now no longer has the need to come out and stop you. So what you start seeing is teams dropping in deeper, and then suddenly your space is gone. And yes, you can progress the ball down the field, but you're faced with a very different problem now, because the problem isn't about finding space to exploit. It then becomes about trying to break down a low block, which is a very different problem altogether. Now, that may sound very theoretical, but I've got hopefully a very nice concrete example of what this looks like, because this is the game against Nottingham Forest from the weekend. This is a drawing game today, so 0-0. Forest are playing in a mid-block, so they are allowing Liverpool a certain amount of space, but there is still space in behind that they can exploit, ways of maybe trying to play through the block. The difference is that when suddenly Forest are winning, they're now in like they're in the two bands basically outside the penalty area. It's the same coverage of space, but it's much deeper. So I think part of the reason why Liverpool are doing so badly this season is because they aren't being able to play the game plan that they have in those winning game states so much. We've got the evidence to show that, because Liverpool last season spent 16% of their time in games in losing game states. This season, you can see they've dropped right down the table, 38% of their games in losing game states, which means they're being put into these scenarios where they're not able to get the most out of their tactical approach that they had last season. So the big problem here is that they aren't actually being able to find their way into games in situations that suit them. And the reason why they're doing this is because they're conceding goals really early.
They are.
So if we look through the list here of the first goals they've conceded in games, you can see the bad run that they have starts with Palace scoring after 9 minutes, then Chelsea scoring after 14 minutes, Man United 2 minutes, Brentford 5 minutes, City 29 minutes a little bit later. But this is the problem that they're facing now, is not that they're not being able to score as many goals as they want to. That is part of the problem. But the main problem, I think, is that they're conceding too many goals. And as a result of that, they then end up in these low blocks that we showed with the Forest game. So you can see 23% of the time when they're playing up against opponents defending, they're up against a low block, which is not what they want to be doing. They want to be opening out space, not trying to break down closed space. So the big question then becomes, well, why is it they've become worse at defending? And I think the reason is well known at this point, because Arne Slot talks about it in every press conference he gives, where he's recognised that teams are now going direct with them a lot more. The reason why they're doing that is because Liverpool, I think, are struggling to win second balls. So if you go long and the ball bounces out, opponents are now much better situated to be able to cause them problems in those moments, and it's causing them a lot of issues. So this is a graph from Hamza Kalik-Luna from The Times, which shows that Liverpool's tackle rate in the middle third of the pitch is comfortably the lowest in the league. Now you might look at something like this and say, well, that's because they're not putting in the effort, and they're not trying hard enough, and they're not being aggressive enough in that midfield area.
If a team's lacking in confidence, surely you're not going to go for it full pelt in the same way, right? I think so.
Yeah, that definitely is a factor. But I think what we can see if we start looking into what they're doing is reasons why they might actually not be giving themselves the best chance of doing well in these sorts of situations. So I've got a couple of examples here. So this is the game against Manchester City. Now the reason why I think that Liverpool are bad at these second ball wins is because I think they're too man-oriented when they're out of possession. So what I mean by that is that in this situation, Liverpool want to have a +1 at the back, so they want to have an extra centre-back to cover for the centre forward. So you can see here, Konate, Van Dijk, both around Haaland, and then the two fullbacks are very, very close to the opposition wingers. So you can see Doku and Cherki here pulling really far apart, and look at the space that opens out here. The midfielders have all been baited high, and so essentially what you're doing then is you're opening out this space, so that if you have any issues with your build-up, this is very similar to what Slot's trying to do the other way around. If there's any issues with your build-up, you know you can play the ball forward, you either win the first ball, in which case golden. If not, the ball's going to bounce down into this area, and there's not much Liverpool coverage there. So the City midfielders can run into that space and challenge much more effectively for the second ball. Contrast that with Aston Villa. So this is Villa, and again we can see the same thing is happening. You've still got a +1 at the back, 2 centre-backs around the centre-forward, and then you've got your full-backs tight to the wide players. But what Villa are doing is they're keeping their wide players super narrow. Villa are doing the same thing. They're trying to build up from the back. But they don't have the opportunity now of being able to go long and then win second balls quite so comfortably, because if they go long and the ball bounces into the second ball zone, there's just much better Liverpool coverage here. And I think this is a game that Liverpool ended up winning because they actually were able to cover that central space much more effectively than they usually are. And so I think this is the reason why Liverpool are struggling this season. Not only is it that they aren't able to do what they were doing last year quite so well, but they're also not able to get into favourable situations as much as they were last time.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of what JJ said in terms of those variables that we can't quite tangibly put our hands on, confidence, those kind of things play into all of this as well. Do you know what? One team that did actually expose Liverpool's tactical deficiencies, as you've mentioned, are Nottingham Forest, now being carried along by the one and only Sean Dyche. Well, here's some time to tell us why.
Welcome to What's Changed, presented by Boyle Sports. Nottingham Forest are on the up. Following the appointment of Sean Dyche, they've taken 7 points from 4 games, bettered only by Arsenal, Chelsea and Aston Villa. Let's take a look at what he's changed and why it's working. Simply put, Forest are enjoying a course correction. Back in September, they appointed Ange Postecoglou, a manager who wants to control possession and press high up the pitch like this, to coach a squad that was built to sit deep, absorb pressure and counter like this. It was a disaster. He struggled to find the right combinations, exemplified by the fact Elliot Anderson was given 4 different midfield partners in 4 straight league games. So Sean Dyche was parachuted in, and he's taken them back to what they're good at. Since his appointment, Forest have the second lowest average possession per game, but a joint second in the league for goals scored. 9 Forest players have started every league game under Dyche, and he's unleashed Nicolo Savona at right back, who scored twice already. After that famous 3-0 win at Anfield, they're now looking up the table, not down.
I mean, what a remarkable turnaround from Nottingham Forest under Sean Dyche. Let's see if they can carry on that momentum. All right. Yeah, we have to talk about the recruitment, JJ, and how perhaps the recruitment has lent to these on-pitch issues that we're seeing. They spent a lot of money, haven't they?
They did spend a lot of money, and it sort of seemed to make sense at the time in terms of how you build a squad. But I think what's actually happened is they've upset the balance of what they had. Okay. And we can go through some of the signings and what's actually changed. So, like, starting at left back, so Kerkez has come in as a player who we know that likes to really attack and get up there, replacing Andy Robertson. But when you take Andy Robertson out of the team, you lose like a leader, someone who can drive, someone part of the team that won everything. So just by missing that on the pitch, that character, I think that's the thing that you lose some of that. That's really important, that stuff. It's some of the intangible stuff. When you have Kerkez, so at the start of the season he wasn't really getting forward as much as you want him to, but also you've got to remember that Luis Diaz was sold. And Luis Diaz was immensely important last season. Like, he scores goals out of nothing, his take-ons are much higher than Gakpo. He's kind of like a winger, so he can create things from the left side that Gakpo can't. And what you keep seeing, even against PSV in the game that happened on time of recording last night, Gakpo often doesn't have the right dialogue with Kerkez. The relationship isn't there. So when Kerkez comes up or underlaps, Gakpo should really be looking for him. But you see against PSV, oftentimes what he would do is he'd come up and Gakpo would just use him as an excuse to come inside and shoot or pass. That's what Gakpo does. So that left side balance is kind of skewed now. When you go to the right back slot, I mean, obviously what you lost Alexander Arnold, who is a unicorn, one of the most creative players of all time from that position anyway. Yeah. But him going out, and John talked about it, so like you replace him with Frimpong. Like, Frimpong's like a winger, basically.
He is.
So he progresses play by carrying, whereas Alexander Arnold is by
distributing and passing.
Exactly. And so if you put a different player in, it changes everything that happens. But like, again, like John's talking about, when you're playing against low blocks, therefore you need someone who can open up a low block. And so if you move the creativity from right back to the end of the final third, you bring in someone like Florian Wirtz, who is over here. Couldn't find him, which is sort of ironic because he's not been there this season.
Some have said he's gone missing a fair bit this season.
Now, the thing is, right, in terms of squad building, if the opportunity to sign Florian Wirtz comes along, you take it because he's absolutely amazing. So it makes total sense. But there's knock-on effects and it upsets the balance. So you have to put Wirtz in midfield, probably somewhere here. But if you put him in to replace Szoboszlai, then suddenly you lose the pressing that you get from Szoboszlai. So the energy, the constant running, like the tackling, everything you get, he's up and down, you lose that because you've got to take him out. McAllister doesn't really have the engine to get up and down. You put Wirtz instead of him, then you lose a lot of balance. You lose the defensive balance that's there. And you can't play him at number 6, obviously, because that's not what he does. You play him off the left, maybe. It doesn't really work. So there's not really a place for him. And he's tried to play it. And by putting him in next to, say, Szoboszlai comes out and put him at right back, again, the balance is upset because you end up with kind of a midfield 2 with McAllister and Gravenberch here. But if you've got Wirtz alongside or next to Ekitike, it essentially becomes like a 4-2-4 shape. And so then what's happening is that Gakpo, who's not a winger, is having to play like a winger to give yourself the width, and Salah is having to stay wide like a winger to give that. So you see Salah's receiving the ball an awful lot as a winger now, and just has to run because he's got players in the middle who are taking up the space that he wants to run into. And like John was saying before, if the player's not there to drop out, like Firmino used to obviously, then suddenly he's not getting as much fun out of that. So that upsets the balance as well, but you're losing like what Liverpool used to be really good at. Obviously they're changing now from being a really relentless pressing team. Lots of teams are going direct against them. You've got to win second balls. They're not really big lads, these. So that's not the whole point. If you're pulled out of position anyway, you can't go and try and compete. But then you have the lack of centre-backs. So this is the thing that some people will say they should have bought another centre-back. They did. They bought Giovanni Leone.
I mean, he's 18 and he's barely played.
But he's very good. That's because he's been injured. He's out for the whole season. So he'll miss the whole season now. But when you're building your squad, you don't want to put blocks in the pathways to players like this. Van Dijk and Konate are obviously going to start. That's the 2 centre-backs. That's what you've got. Joe Gomez, I think, has only played 1 full 90 minutes in the year 2025. So maybe can't rely on him yet, but he's been brought back in. He could, in theory, be the backup to Konate here. So you think, well, maybe they should have an extra centre-back there. They almost got Mark Gahey. They didn't pay 45 million that they could have done at the start of the summer, I think it was. If they had Mark Gahey, you could then take Konate out. I mean, he was just taken off against PSV because of clear errors he was making. That happens to Konate, he makes errors. But when things start to go wrong in front of you, there's only so much a centre-back can do. And if Kerkez is then pulled up here and Van Dijk has to cover for him because Gakpo's doing something that he shouldn't be, and then they lose the ball and turn it over, what ends up happening is that there's a huge amount of space left for one player to cover, and sometimes it ends up being McAllister who doesn't have the engine to get back because the balance has been upset kind of everywhere. And you can see it with some data, which the data team gave me. Thank you.
I love data. Come on.
I love the data team for giving me the data. So this is McAllister in 2024-25, and this is him this year. You can see a bit of difference in lots of crosses last season, but this is not as much of a progressive kind of player this season. You're not able to progress the ball. So all the things John's talking about earlier, I think, are all relevant here. Szoboszlai, completely different. So he's nowhere near as effective in goal. I mean, he's also playing at right back an awful lot.
But this is the thing, he's out of position.
Yeah, so like you're not getting what he gave you last season. And the Wirtz is meant to be an upgrade on him. He's not delivered anywhere near what you'd expect or hope him to have done.
But can I just say though, some of Liverpool's best moments so far this season have still come from Szoboszlai. The free kick against Arsenal, he's scored a few belters already.
It's because he's amazing.
He's superb.
He also, because he runs constantly and tries to like make up for the mistakes that other people make, he sometimes ends up out of position. So you end up with him trying to do too much. Against Bournemouth at the start of the season, there's a rest defence, I think we covered it earlier. Where he runs to make a run where maybe he shouldn't, he should just stay, and these little subtle differences are how teams can get at you. Because we saw some of these problems at the start of the season, and Gravenberch is mostly the same as he was last season. But I think I can show like everything I'm kind of talking about and some of the intangibles in the final goal that PSV scored against Liverpool from last night. So here you have Gakpo, you've got Kerkez making the underlapping run next to him. Gakpo doesn't use him as an easy slip ball to get him in behind, and then you could probably create from there. But Gakpo, as he does, comes inside. He plays backwards. Kerkez is out of position. So loads of players are just now caught up the pitch. This is the very end of the game, so a lot of caveats here. Listening to a lot of Liverpool podcasts, especially the Red Men as well, they're talking about how the players just look knackered this season. I think that probably comes in with a lot of the mental stuff, mental fatigue, but also they look tired constantly. And so they don't have the energy to get back. They also don't have players who can really do that, because as PSV win the ball, it's a mistake by Gakpo, he plays it too short, so they can easily intercept. Individual errors, another thing Slot can't really control. Earlier in this game, Van Dijk tries to volleyball the ball away in the penalty area. He doesn't do that sort of stuff. These things just keep happening all at once. All these things you can't control. And so PSV can attack really quickly, and then you start seeing everyone's trying to get back. You've got Van Dijk being pulled wide because Kerkez being too high up the pitch. You've got McAllister as the one trying to run back. He's not got the engine for it. And then you see slightly later in the move, Kerkez starts to give up here. This is when he just stops running because he's too tired, he doesn't want to. Ball gets in behind Van Dijk. They are able to run. Everyone goes towards the ball, they get dragged, and so you've got the player who ends up scoring it as the cutback comes to him. So players following the ball. You shouldn't have Gravenberch as a centre-back at no point, so maybe an error in recruitment, but maybe it's not. It's just lots of little things that have gone wrong all at the same time, and it's combined to make everything look a lot worse than it is. It is bad, but I don't know, is it as bad? Is it as bad?
Good question, because Steven Gerrard basically said we can't call it a crisis until maybe 6 months' time. Maybe next year, February, we'll start seeing if they continue in this kind of form, John. But like, there's still time to fix this. it's not that bad. It's a decent squad, and they've got a very good coach.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about the intangible things here, and those things are really important. But there are some tangible things here, I think, that Slot can do. We've already talked about how when they're defending, they're too easily manipulated. The issue is that we're opening out this space. And I think this is the area that they're really getting killed on. That's the reason why teams are playing so often long against Liverpool, because they know they can go long, win the second ball and progress from there. They've got to find a way of, I think, softening the man marking that they have here, so that they actually have a bit more zonal coverage in these areas. There's plenty of ways they can do that.
Yeah.
They don't need me to sit here and be like, this is how you do it. But
They have data analysts.
I think that's what they've got to have in their heads, this idea: how are we going to make that area of the pitch better covered? That will then result in fewer goals conceded. That will then mean that they can play it in the way that they're playing in possession. And I think, you know, there's other things in possession that they can do that will help them out as well. We talked about the staggering, the different solutions that they have in different lines on the pitch when they're trying to build out. And they've lost some players, they've added players. I mean, we've not really even talked about the impact of Wirtz at the club. And I think in many respects it's because Wirtz operates best in the final third with just sort of facilitating possession. And that's not what they're doing. They want to possess the ball deep. What happens when you start dropping Wirtz into this conversation? How is that going to impact things? Another thing is that because opponents have realised that Gravenberch is super important for Liverpool's escaping from these moments of pressure, is that teams will often just mark him out of the game, right? So what we started seeing a little bit more is Gravenberch dropping into the first line, which is fine, and it's a way that a lot of teams will solve that kind of problem. But what you're then doing is you're reducing the number of players in the middle. Let's say you've only got McAllister as the out ball here. Probably what you're going to end up having happen is having Szoboszlai drop in to help out. Now you've got fewer players in the front line as well. So by solving a problem in one way, you're creating a knock-on effect somewhere else. So I think there are solutions that they can find in possession as well. And I think that's the thing that Liverpool have to focus on. But I think so much of this at this point becomes so hard. I mean, the analogy that I might use is like a Jenga block, where, you know, as soon as take one piece out, it has an impact on the rest of the pieces in that block. And as you start as you start moving things around and taking a bit out here and putting it on the top, the tower can wobble a little bit more. So it's easy for me to sit here and say there are tangible tactical solutions to make. It's much harder to put them into practice in reality.
Let's talk about taking a piece out. Salah is going to AFCON. So does that give Liverpool the option to try some new things while he's away?
Maybe. The most obvious one for me would be like if you have Salah in this right position here, if you put a winger on, like Frimpong could be, or maybe Chiesa, it balances out that 4-2-4 kind of attacking shape a bit better because you've got an outside winger. But you lose Salah, who's been like one of their best players. One of the things we didn't really talk about is like Salah defensively. I've covered it in another video we did where, I mean, you saw it against PSV in Champions League midweek where he just lets people go past him. He's not a defensive player and people are exploiting that. There are things that other teams are exploiting against them. I think Salah's one example, and it's probably relevant to this as well. Another thing that they're doing quite a lot is they're trying to be patient, but also they keep rushing things. They go quickly too fast. So another thing PSV were doing, we're just waiting for them to, they were baiting, they're just waiting for them to play through them. They're waiting for them to try and play. And then Liverpool didn't know what to do, so they would go long really early, and they don't really have the players around them because they're built to be deeper to try and win that second ball. So again, they're giving the ball away too early, they're trying to rush it, then they're trying to be too patient, they've got all that there. Losing Salah, he was the main player last season. Like he was all the goals, all the assists, it was all him. You're missing Alexander Arnold, who's a huge part of why he's able to get in those situations in the first place. And by removing, the right back position is one of the ones I didn't really talk about. They have Bradley, who's I think is a really good right back, so you can't really replace him too much. Frimpong's a good, decent option to have as a backup to him. But when you take out that right back, another bit of the balance you lose is the right-sided triangle, which is really important last season. Szoboszlai, the right back, and Salah would all dance around. Where's the right back? Let's choose him. So these guys all would work really importantly together as a little team. So they'd be able to get Salah in behind and someone would offer the width. So you get Szoboszlai out wide, you can then play the ball in because he's got that ball on him. But also Alexander Arnold had the ball on him to be able to switch it. You're just losing all that there. So there's a lot of this I think is Alexander Arnold being gone from the team. I think a lot of the creativity and a lot of the build-up and all that sort of stuff. Because if you've got a player like Alexander Arnold, when a team's waiting for you to try and play through them, he's the one that can ping it through. But then they don't really have that. And they have Van Dijk used to play the ball out to the right to Salah, but they don't really do that anymore. And so it's just an awful lot of knock-on things that are there. But also, like the rest of the league has gone more direct.
It has.
And they've also got really good at set pieces. And Liverpool have got exponentially worse. They've conceded 9 goals in the Premier League, and they've scored 1, I think it is, which is the joint worst, I think, or the worst in both categories. And then the first goal they conceded was a corner. The ball goes in, everyone goes crazy, and Van Dijk tries to slap the ball away. So their set piece defensively is really poor. Then they've got other tactical stuff which isn't quite aligned. But can Slot control when players don't win tackles?
No.
Like, is that his fault?
No.
If they don't win a tackle? If Szoboszlai, one of the best players on the pitch, doesn't really control the ball and it bounces loose, and then Konate just doesn't touch the ball, like, whose fault is that? How do you fix that? And I think that it is relevant, like with Slot, can he fix it? The players are all very expensive assets, and they're the ones that will be there. The change that you can make always in these situations is a manager. But if a manager comes in, what changes does he make to this?
Yeah, good question. And I guess for Slot as well, I mean, how disillusioned do the players start becoming with a system that doesn't seem to be working? That's the hardest part, really.
Yeah, and this is the situation that they find themselves in. And at some point, as JJ says, the easiest solution to a problem like this is to just bring in a new manager. And if not because the manager himself is the problem, but because you're bringing someone else in, it's a clean slate, you start again. And again, it's what we were talking about before. If the manager can't bring the players with them in order to create the solutions, then it doesn't matter if you can find all the solutions in a tactical sense, because you've lost the players. And I think that's the situation that Liverpool are going to find themselves in, is when they're conceding 4 goals against PSV, they're conceding 3 goals against Forest. It's a very slippery slope that they find themselves in.
Sometimes as well, the psychological effect when you change a manager, because exactly, it's not that he's not a good manager, it's that it just changes things, and that can sometimes be enough to have a reset, even if it isn't really, it just feels like it is.
Yeah, Liverpool fans, for now, Slot stays. Let's see how he gets on.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.